The kids mocked the old security guard, never accomplished anything in his life. Samuel Torres just smiled quietly. What they didn't know was that the medal story on the museum wall was actually his Welcome to Shadow Veteran Stories. They mocked him for being just a security guard. What they didn't know would shock them. Have you ever underestimated someone because of their job? Like and subscribe for more hidden heroes. The National Military History Museum stood like a monument to courage on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., its marble columns and bronze plaques telling stories of valor that spanned generations. Inside, glass cases held the treasures of American military history: medals, uniforms, weapons, and photographs of heroes whose sacrifices had shaped the nation. Samuel Torres had been walking these halls for 3 years now, his soft-soled shoes making whispered sounds against the polished floors. At 58, he moved with the careful pace of a man who'd learned that rushing rarely solved anything important. His security uniform was always pressed, his badge polished, and his smile genuine whenever visitors asked for directions to the restrooms or the gift shop. Most people saw exactly what they expected to see: an aging security guard who'd probably never done anything more exciting than chase teenagers away from the "do not touch" signs. They saw a man whose life had settled into the comfortable routine of checking doors, monitoring cameras, and making sure no one got too close to the displays. What they didn't see was the way Samuel's eyes lingered on certain exhibits, the way he paused a little longer near the Vietnam War section, the way his hand sometimes unconsciously moved to touch his chest, where something heavy once hung that no one could see anymore. On this particular Tuesday morning, the museum was hosting a field trip from Lincoln Middle School. 37 eighth graders with backpacks and smartphones, led by Mrs. Henderson, a history teacher who believed firmly in the power of teachable moments and wasn't afraid to create them wherever she found an opportunity. Samuel was adjusting the lighting on a display case when the group entered the main hall, their voices echoing off the high ceilings like birdsong in a cathedral. Mrs. Henderson gathered them near the entrance, clipboard in hand, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 20 years managing teenage attention spans. "Now, remember, class," she said, "this museum represents the very best of American military service. These are stories of people who chose to serve their country with honor and distinction." Samuel smiled slightly, continuing his work. He'd heard variations of this speech from dozens of teachers over the years. It never got old. "But I want you to remember something else," Mrs. Henderson continued, and Samuel noticed her tone shifting slightly. "Life is about choices. Every day you choose what kind of person you want to become. You can choose to be excellent, to serve something greater than yourself." She paused dramatically, her eyes scanning the group until they landed on Samuel, bent over his work nearby. "Or you can choose to settle for less, to drift through life without purpose or achievement." Samuel felt the change in the room's atmosphere before he saw it. The way conversations quieted, the way 37 pairs of teenage eyes suddenly found a focus. "Look around this museum," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a life lesson. "These walls are filled with people who chose greatness, who chose to make a difference, who chose to be remembered for something important." She gestured toward Samuel without looking directly at him. "And then you have people who choose differently, people who drift from job to job, never really applying themselves, never achieving anything significant, content to spend their lives in the background, invisible, unremarkable." A few students began to snicker. Samuel straightened up slowly, his face calm but something flickering in his eyes. "I mean, imagine being 60 years old and your biggest accomplishment is making sure teenagers don't touch museum exhibits," Mrs. Henderson continued. "Imagine never having done anything worth remembering, never having served your country, never having made a real contribution to society." The snickering grew louder. A boy named Jason, who sat in the back of every class and made comments about everything, decided this was his moment. "Yeah, look at that guy," he said loudly enough for Samuel to hear. "Probably peaked in high school, never accomplished anything in his life, just wandering around a museum all day." His friend Kyle joined in. "Bet he wishes he could be like the real heroes in here instead of just watching them." "Career security guard," added Ashley, with the particular cruelty that only 8th graders could perfect. "That's what happens when you don't try hard enough in school." Samuel continued adjusting the display, his movements steady and methodical. His face showed nothing but the slight smile he always wore when children visited. But something in his posture had changed, become more still, more focused. Mrs. Henderson, emboldened by what she perceived as a successful object lesson, pressed on. "This is why education matters, class. This is why setting goals matters. Because the alternative is," she gestured again toward Samuel, "well, you can see for yourself." That's when Samuel did something he rarely did anymore. He straightened to his full height, turned around, and looked directly at the group, not with anger or offense, but with something that made several students unconsciously step back. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice carrying easily across the marble hall. "I wonder if you and your students might be interested in hearing about this particular exhibit." He gestured to the display case he'd been working on. Inside, behind thick glass, sat a Purple Heart medal, a bronze star, and a small collection of photographs from Vietnam. Mrs. Henderson blinked, caught off guard by the interruption. Well, we have a schedule to maintain. It'll just take a moment," Samuel said, still in that quiet voice that somehow commanded attention. "I think your students might find this story educational." Several of the kids were already moving closer, drawn by curiosity and the sense that something was about to happen. Samuel pointed to the Purple Heart. "This medal was awarded to a young soldier in Vietnam, 1968. He was 19 years old, from a small town in Texas. His unit was ambushed during a reconnaissance mission near the Cambodian border." Mrs. Henderson found herself listening despite her schedule. "The ambush lasted 6 hours, Samuel continued. "This soldier, he was just a private then, took shrapnel in his shoulder and leg, but he stayed in position, providing cover fire while his squad evacuated wounded." Jason, who had been making jokes moments before, was now staring at the medal in the case. "He could have retreated with the others," Samuel said. "No one would have blamed him. He was wounded, outnumbered, but 3 of his friends were pinned, down by sniper fire, so he stayed." The museum had grown quiet around them. Other visitors were pausing to listen. For 2 hours, this private held off an entire squad of NVA regulars, used up all his ammunition, then started throwing grenades. Took 2 more hits here and here. Samuel pointed to his ribs and his thigh, but he gave his squad time to set up a counterattack. Ashley looked uncomfortable now. The easy mockery from minutes before felt suddenly inappropriate. When the fighting was over, they found him still conscious, still at his position, refused medical evacuation until every other wounded soldier was taken care of first. Samuel's voice remained steady, matter of fact. "Spent 4 months in a field hospital. When he got out, they wanted to put him in for the Medal of Honor." Kyle whispered. "What happened?" "He turned it down," Samuel said simply. "Said he was just doing his job. Said the real heroes were the ones who didn't come home." Mrs. Henderson's face had gone pale. Something in Samuel's tone, in the precision of his details, was making her understand that this wasn't just a tour guide's memorized speech. "So they gave him the Purple Heart and the Bronze Star instead," Samuel continued. "Sent him home with her limp and a chest full of metal he never wanted. And you know what he did then?" The entire group was silent now. "He came home, went to college on the GI Bill, became a teacher, taught history for 30 years, coached Little League, volunteered at the VA hospital, helped other veterans get back on their feet." Samuel's hand moved unconsciously to his chest, "And when he retired, he came here, to this museum, because even though he never wanted recognition, even though he never talked about what happened, over there he believed that the stories needed to be told, that the next generation needed to understand what service really means." Mrs. Henderson's clipboard was trembling in her hands, and he figured the best way to honor his friends who didn't come home was to make sure their stories lived on. Even if that meant spending his days being invisible, being overlooked, being dismissed by people who assumed they knew everything about him because of the uniform he wore. Jason's voice was barely audible. Is that story real?" Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather wallet. From it, he removed a faded photograph. 8 young soldiers in jungle fatigues, arms around each other, smiling at the camera despite the mud and exhaustion on their faces. He pointed to the young man in the center. Dark hair, bright smile, eyes that hadn't yet seen everything they would see. "Private Samuel Torres," he said quietly. 19 years old, small town in Texas, big dreams." He looked at the photograph for a moment, then carefully put it away. 3 of those boys didn't make it home," he said. "Every day I work here, I remember them. Every student who comes through those doors, every tourist who looks at these displays, they're seeing Tommy Martinez and Billy Chen and David Rodriguez too, because their stories are here, even if their names aren't on the walls." The silence in the museum was complete now. Other visitors had gathered at the edges of the group, listening. Mrs. Henderson's voice was barely a whisper. "Mr. Torres, I am so sorry. I had no idea. I would never have—" Samuel held up a gentle hand. "Ma'am, you don't need to apologize. You were trying to teach your students about making good choices, about serving something bigger than themselves. That's important." He looked at the group of students, his expression kind but serious. "But maybe the lesson isn't about avoiding failure. Maybe it's about understanding that service comes in many forms, that heroes don't always look like what you expect them to look like." Kyle raised his hand tentatively. "Mr. Torres, can you tell us more about your friends, the ones who didn't come home?" Samuel's smile was genuine now, warm. "I'd be honored to." For the next 40 minutes, Samuel Torres told stories that weren't in any textbook. Stories about young men who'd shared sea rations and letters from home, who'd kept each other alive with humor and hope and stubborn determination. Stories about courage that had nothing to do with medals and everything to do with ordinary people, choosing to do extraordinary things. He told them about Tommy Martinez, who'd wanted to be a teacher and who'd saved 5 wounded soldiers during a mortar attack. About Billy Chen, who'd dreamed of opening a restaurant with his father and who'd volunteered for the most dangerous missions because he said somebody had to do it. About David Rodriguez, Rodriguez, who'd been planning to propose to his girlfriend when he got home and who died trying to save a village full of civilians, and slowly something remarkable happened. The students stopped being tourists looking at history and became people learning about humanity. They asked questions not about medals and battles, but about what it felt like to be so far from home, about how young men found courage when they were terrified, about what it meant to lose friends and still keep going. Mrs. Henderson stood at the back of the group, tears streaming down her face, understanding that she was witnessing something far more valuable than any lesson plan she'd ever written. When the formal museum tour was over, the students lingered. They asked for Samuel's autograph, took pictures with him, promised to write letters. Jason, who had started the mockery, was the last to leave. "Mr. Torres," he said, "I'm really sorry about what I said. I was being stupid." Samuel put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Son, we all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after we realize we've made them. Can I come back sometime to hear more stories?" "Anytime," Samuel said. "The museum's always here, and so am I." After the group left, Samuel returned to his work, adjusting displays and checking locks. But something had changed. Other visitors approached him throughout the day, asking questions, wanting to know more about the exhibits, about the stories behind the artifacts. A Vietnam veteran visiting with his grandson recognized Samuel's name from military records and spent an hour sharing memories. A young soldier on leave thanked him for his service and asked advice about dealing with deployment anxiety. By the end of the day, Samuel realized that something had shifted. He was no longer invisible, no longer just a security guard. He had become what he'd always been, but had hidden from the world, a living bridge between history and the present, between the heroes on the walls and the people who needed to understand what those heroes had sacrificed. That evening, as Samuel locked up the museum, he paused at the Vietnam exhibit. The Purple Heart and Bronze Star sat in their case, lit by soft spotlights, surrounded by photographs and documents that told the official version of the story. But now there was something new. A handwritten note from Jason slipped through the pale slot. "Mr. Torres, thank you for teaching us that heroes don't always look like heroes. I'm going to study harder and try to serve something bigger than myself someday. Maybe I can be half as brave as you and your friends. Jason." Samuel folded the note carefully and put it in his wallet, next to the photograph of 8 young soldiers who'd believed they could change the world. Tomorrow, more students would come. More tourists would pass through, looking for easy lessons and simple inspiration. And Samuel would be here, as he had been for 3 years, watching over the stories of men who'd given everything so that school children could visit museums in safety and make jokes about security guards. But maybe now, some of those visitors would understand that the most important exhibits in any museum aren't behind glass. They're walking the halls, checking the doors, making sure the lights work properly. They're the living reminders that heroism doesn't end when the war does, and that service doesn't stop when you take off the uniform. Some stories are meant to be displayed on walls. Others are meant to be lived, quietly and without fanfare, one day at a time. And sometimes, if you're lucky enough to ask the right questions, those living stories will share themselves with you. So now I ask you, have you ever met someone like Samuel Torres, someone you dismissed as just doing their job, only to discover they were carrying history in their heart? Someone whose real story was far more remarkable than anything you could have imagined. Share their memory in the comments. Tell us about the hidden heroes walking among us every day. Because at Shadow Veteran Stories, we believe that the most powerful exhibits aren't in museums. They're in the people who clean them, guard them, and keep their stories alive. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Help us honor the quiet heroes who surround us, and we'll see you in the next story. Until then, remember that you never know who you're really looking at, so maybe it's worth treating everyone with the respect that heroes deserve.